Once again, hi everyone. My name is Ariel Tan. I use she, her pronouns, and I'll be the host today for the Developing a Strategic Plan Gap Year Planning session. I'm really excited because this is a topic that personally really interests me as someone who went through one gap year already and is currently in my gap year number 2. Once again, we are Seeking Out, and Seeking Out is a global resource hub for aspiring and current brain researchers and practitioners. And many of us who are PhD trainees or PhD hopefuls, uplifting each other. We dismantle barriers that make training programs and our field exclusive, inaccessible, and effective. Feel free to follow us here on social media at Seeking Out, and stay tuned for some of upcoming programs. So we do have a mentorship program. They're still accepting both mentees and mentors. We also have an application bootcamp, which is our staple from last summer. So stay tuned for those. And additionally, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge yesterday's event. So as some of you may know, yesterday the Supreme Court here in the US has struck down Roe versus Wade, which is taking away abortion rights and access to a lot of people. And this has impacted the US directly and many people globally. And today's conversation is about making choices for ourselves. But sometimes it can also feel like we're talking about producing something. So this is just a reminder that we live in a society that have all these forces and all these underpinning tension. So that being said, please be gentle to yourself as you are processing today's information, and also to kind of keep an eye on your mental health. So here is a picture from one of my favorite mangas and animation series called Naruto. And for those of you who are familiar with it, it's one of the very popular and famous Japanese manga that talk about how a little kid from this village went through all these training to become a great ninja and eventually become the leader of the village and gaining people's recognition and acceptance. And the important thing is there's 2 series. So you have the Naruto original, I have Naruto Shippuden, where this kid grew up from I think 12 and then coming back for 16 because he went away on a special training with this special, senpai. And this side journey turned out to be really important because it kind of give him the strength, give him the introspection, give him the connection and friendship that he later used for his, second half of the journey. And right here is where he come back to the village, where he's really excited, saying, "You haven't changed at all." And I really resonate with this because for me, I don't think a gap year is a gap in your life. I don't think gap year is a break in your school. I don't think there's anything wrong with taking a gap year, because it's not a gap in your academic pursuit or a career. It's just a part of your quest on, what you want to do. And eventually through this quest, you're becoming a stronger person and getting closer to your goals. And also the concept of having a gap year is this notion that somehow your life got interrupted. The fact of the matter is that life is a continuous journey, and there's no single pathway to your success. Because when we say we're taking a gap, then we're comparing our life to someone. But there's no single way and single outcome of life, because we're all living our best thing. So I want to share this kind of shape my story as well as today's content. So like I mentioned earlier, I took 2 gap years. The first one is between my undergrad and my master's, and the second one is currently what I'm living here right now. So in my first gap year, I graduated from undergrad. I was super tired and burnout. And then I just was like, you know what, I can't do more schooling. Now, I was a psych undergrad. I did research when I was in undergrad, but I graduated in 3 years. So in my last year, I didn't have time and effort to even think about career planning because I just want to graduate and, enjoy my time in school while I can. So I got really tired and burned out, and I just worked in a really admin heavy and customer service heavy positions at UCSD, which eventually led to a more community engagement positions. And mind me, this is not an academic environment. Even though I was working in higher education, it was student affairs, which is everything that's not research related. And with that being said, a lot of opportunities and information and just my experiences were not research related. They were much more higher ed. So during this time, I completed 2 certificate programs. One of them is free because it's just one of the online, MOOC certificate. The other one is with a scholarship because our staff assembly at my school do have this scholarship program. So I applied, I got the money, ended up taking classes and completing a certificate program at our extension school, which a lot of schools have, is called continuing education. And I also won 2 awards because I got really involved in the professional organizations we have pertaining to my field. Many of us are really involved when we're students. So when you are like working full time, sometimes you can get bored, and that's not what happened to me. And I just want to do something outside of my very admin heavy and customer service based work. So throughout these involvement, I ended up getting 2 awards, and that also led to me attending 2 conferences. So I attended a total of 4 conferences, 3 of which I presented as something, and one of them I ended up getting an award. So I went there, which is really nice because getting an award allowed me to have money to go to these events. And last but not least, because of my own personal interest and passion, I ended up volunteering at a lot of social justice related events committees. So for example, for my school, we have a campus-wide leadership training for all our student leaders, and their social justice and equity-minded focus. So I was a facilitator there, where they give you a bunch of training and information that really helped me in one, gaining the connections, but also kind of reshaping what I want to do. So what I end up getting is I get a master's in arts, or Master of Arts in Higher Education and Student Affairs, and for a very long time, that's what I thought I would be doing. Well, plot twist, just like many people who have this new revelations during COVID, it happened to me too. So after COVID, or specifically during COVID, I had this sort of realization where I'm like, even though I was working full time, I didn't really enjoy what I was doing anymore, and I just wanted to really pursue my goal, my research goal. And that being said, so in August 2020, I just quit my job, and what I said to myself is, you know what, I'll stay involved in higher education, I'll find a part-time job, and I'll just apply for a psych PhD. And that's what I did. And then I also went back to China because that's where I'm from, because I want to spend some family time. So I worked remotely and stayed involved in higher education associations. During this time, I ended up getting 1 publication now, which is really exciting for me. But this is a really long process because, as you can see, I started the submission in 2019 and it didn't really get published until the beginning of 2021. And because of my involvement in the association, I was also leading several workshops and seminars. And once again, because association is about higher education, the seminar and workshops are about supporting international students during COVID. So it's more higher ed focused as well. And lastly, I also got the art certificate because I just learned through the grapevine, through online searches, that art is a really, really important tool that I didn't get exposed to when I was in school. So I had to pick up that certificate on the way. And then I didn't get into any grad school. And I will answer that question in a bit. I didn't get into grad school. I'm responding to Mirka's question in the chat. I didn't get into grad school, and I came back to the US. I was like, okay, so I had to find a job because one of the feedback I got on my application is I need more direct research experience because a lot of the transferable skills are great, but it doesn't really translate, or I just don't have the connection. So I was job searching, and as you can imagine, job searching during a pandemic can be really difficult. During this time, I worked 2 part-time jobs. One of them is entitled survey assistant within a research group, but it's more admin heavy job. It's the most admin heavy job you can ever think of because it's about data entry, data cleaning. And the other part-time job has nothing to do with research because I was basically a community engagement and graphic designer. It's a really interesting role where I was designing and creating content for someone else. During this time though, which is something I'm grateful of, because I was working 2 part-time jobs, because I was still trying to figure out my life, I had a lot of time. So I ended up getting 3 publications out. Out of the 3, all of them is collaborations with faculties I met through the organizations. But 2 of them was because I worked with them for a while, we had this relationship, and then they just kind of reached out to me saying, hey, we have this, paper opportunity. Do you want to contribute and be a part of it? And I also went to 3 conferences, and all the 3 conferences, 2 of them were presentation. That being said, they were all virtual because we were still in like the pandemic phase. And then eventually, after month of waiting and application, all that good stuff, I found my job where I currently work as a lab manager here at UCI. And then between July 2021 till now, almost a year working in my current positions, I was able to get 4 conference and poster presentations out, 2 independent projects that's going on, as well as 2 writing in progress. So the reason why I kind of share my story is, number one, I'm a very like narrative-based person. I really enjoy hearing other people's narrative and stories. So I hope that my story can kind of build connections with you all. But also, all of my story kind of shape what I think of gap years and what resources I want to share today. And most importantly, he also shape and outline my positionality. Because the one thing before I even launch into a conversation today is, please remember that what works for one person like me might not work for you, because we have different identities, we have different access, we also have different strengths and challenges. I'm an extrovert by nature, for example, so me being like a space with a lot of people, me in a conversation heavy spaces is not really challenging because I feed off energy from these environments. But I do have a lot of friends who are introverts, which can feel really draining these environments. So that's something I want to recognize and acknowledge. And another piece is identity. I have my own privileges. So for example, even though I have an international background, I do have immigration status, which allow me to have access to different jobs. So I say all this to say that please keep what I say today with a grain of salt, and please keep this positionality in your mind. So I hope you can take away what applies to you, and hopefully today's conversation is fruitful for everyone involved today. And then I also want to highlight that your value does not rely on productivity, because again, a lot of the information I share are very number and quantity focused. Reason being because I thought that was the most direct way to kind of share what I've done so far and how hopefully that can inspire you to do something similar. But that being said, I also recognize research and work are only one sector of your life. So please don't feel like, oh, I'm behind. Today's conversation is meant to make you excited, make you inspired, not necessarily to make you stressed or overwhelmed. And last but not least, life is meant to be dynamic, so plans do change. The key isn't about being executive about your steps. It isn't about following every single thing I've said I was going to do, but feeling empowered in making your own choices. So once again, a gentle reminder that the tools and tips are personal anecdote and things I've learned from organizations. Your worth is not measured by your productivity. So let me take strategic planning is a word I learned when I was working in different universities, because what happened is that university have these strategic plan that basically laid out their goal, their mission, what they want to do, what they want to do in 5 years, what they want to do in 10 years. And this plan shapes a lot of decisions for other departments. So, my department had to support my university goals, so I had to allocate my resources in a certain way. So in the strict definition, strategic planning is an organization's process of defining strategies or directions and making decisions on allocating its resources to attain strategic goals. And I think that while, this word is kind of exists in the organizational leadership environment, it also applies for us in making our life plans. So the first thing I recommend all of you to do as you're looking ahead in your gap year is to define goals into a mission statement. So just write a mission statement for yourself. And what I mean is, a lot of us, like myself, we want to get into grad school. So you're using this gap year to strengthen ourselves to get into grad school. It's great, but it's not specific enough. So I recommend using the SMART goal framework as a way to write down your own mission statement. So for example, in my case, I want to refine my research interest on biculturalism because that's something that I'm interested in, through reading more papers on bilingualism. So there's one action items I can do that kind of allow me to refine my research interest. Learning R, because it was kind of important for me to do that. I'm presenting my project at X1C conferences, so on and so forth. For some of you who might be familiar, SMART goal is this framework in creating a goal that are specific, that are measurable, that are attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And this also allowed us to have some sort of framework to write everything down, as well as to kind of identify and allocate resources. So speaking of that, after you've identified your goals and write your mission statement, you will want to figure out what kind of resources you have to make them come true or progress. And sometimes the hardest thing for people to know is, what am I asking and what am I looking for? And here are some categories for you to consider. And these categories helps because they lay down what you can start looking for. The first one of resources to think about is financial. So, and this means like looking ahead, what do you have a saving plan? If you're applying for grad school, how much money you're going to be spending in this process? If you're job searching, how much money would you need to have a comfortable life? What is a comfortable salary range amount? And also applying for fellowship and grant, which I will kind of talk more about later. And the second one is human resources. So who are my networks? Who can I rely on? Who can I conduct informational interviews with? Your college professor, college classmates are great because they are those connections that you can kind of start asking these questions or getting some information from immediately, even like spaces like us. Informational, so helpful documents, finding out shared tips, getting on listservs. So time, the reason why I put time here is because, again, research, grad school, career, these are only part of our life. So there's other things happening on the background of our life. For example, do you want to spend more time with family? Do you want to spend more time with loved ones? So these are some things for you to consider as well. Last but not least, there's the cultural and care piece. And the reason why I put cultural here is this is meant to kind of talk about this like mental health and self-care environment where we want to provide a support and network. So Psyching Out was founded because as some of the other online spaces we run into, it can be really competitive or competition driven. So we feel really marginalized in those communities because we always feel like we're not good enough. So after getting resources, instead of feeling like you're in power, you feel like you're an imposter. So that being said, I think it's important for all of us to think about who are our support and network and who can help us create this culture of care and culture of collaboration, culture of support. And the one things I've also learned throughout my time just talking to people, because I love talking to people and learn about their stories, is that people might not always answer your questions, but they can give you ideas. So what I mean is I used to approach someone with a question, do you think I should do X or like why? Sometimes they'll give me a really definite answer, but sometimes the answer is really vague and really like situational. So one thing I think could be helpful for you to do information interview is keep in mind that when talking to others, you might not always get a very clear pictures of what you should do, but rather on what you could do. And these conversations, I mean, for you to build connections and boost your morale. It's not to make you feel beat down and imposter-like. And lastly, people will give you contradicting suggestions because we have different backgrounds. So what I also recommend is have this concept of board of advisors. So board of advisors is this concept that sometimes we'll make decisions, we can't really make decisions for ourselves, organizations. The organization will reach out to experts to kind of ask for advice and make the decision, because sometimes there are lots of noises in the data or the noises in their consultation process. So I recommend you all to identify a few people who you really trust. They could be your professor, they could be your PI, they could be your best friend, they could be a grad student you work really close with, and utilize them as a way to ask for additional feedback and filter through suggestions that are seemingly contradictory. And again, all of them are based on my personal anecdote as well as some conversation I've had with others. So do take this with a grain of salt and feel free to ask questions in the chat, which we'll go over later. So as far as the tips, there are 4 areas. So there's research, publication and presentation, skill development, and personal related. So number 1, if you are able to, I recommend jobs over unfunded certificate programs. And the reason why I say this is sometimes I'll have students come to me be like, Ariel, do you think it's better for me to keep looking for a job, or apply for a certificate program and just enroll in certificate program? And my recommendation is always job is better, unless your certificate program is funded, because it's a different story, right? Because you are getting the financial support and resources. Because jobs give you income, they give you work experiences and networks and additional opportunities. On the flip side, if you are doing a career change, I do think a certificate program could be helpful. So for example, one of my current RAs right now in my lab is a post-bac RAs because he has a background in art and he wants to get into more neuroscience related things. And because there's such a big gap, so he did enroll into the certificate program within our school specific to psychology, and they ended up being really helpful and for him because of this career and field switch. However, if you are a psych major, if you are neuroscience majors, I do think trying to find a job should be a priority over just, applying and getting into another certificate program, because the fear of like, oh, I have this gap, oftentimes make us make decisions are not super sound. Because certificate programs oftentimes are really expensive. They're not accredited. They're not master's program. So there is like a difference. So that being said, if you can, get a job. And if you decide to do master's, note that you will not qualify for NSF GSF. And then a lot of the research positions are still very admin and project management heavy. And I say this to say that sometimes people have this perception that once they're a lab manager, once they're a research assistant, all they're doing is research. Like they can publish papers, they can present, which is partially true. But again, because these research related positions are still very admin and project management heavy, you might not get all the things you want to through your job. So you might need to do some additional explore or development on things like, coding or improving your analytic skills. And then, so right here, we have this whole sections about if you cannot land a position in research, things you can do. And the reason why we did this is because for this workshop series or for this redirection series, we already have 2 workshops usually about job search. So a lot of today's conversation is about, say, if you already found the job or you can't find a job, what you can do. And this is something I recommend is if you cannot land a position in research, here are a couple of things you can do. Number 1 is you can work in a temporary position and continue to look for research opportunities. And this is kind of what I did. So I did 2 part-time jobs. I volunteer at a local lab where I go in once a week for 4 hours, and I continue my own independent study on the side. And then the second option is you can work in another field and continue research through volunteer. So what I did in my other segment of my life is I worked full-time at a school as an administrator, but I was still really interested in research. However, my job is not research oriented. So I ended up collaborating with colleagues on research related to international students, which is kind of the example I shared earlier. The transferable skills is the concept that even though I might not have direct experiences, I can borrow what I've learned from another capacity and utilize this in this job that I want to do. So for example, people who are interested in research will need ability to do data management and data analysis. So what I did is I ended up leading some assessment initiatives because I generally enjoy doing assessments. And then when I write reports, so it's about making graphs, it's about collecting survey data. I did this for both of my work and associations. And those are the skills I ended up putting on my CV and resume as analytic skills because they are data management and analytic skills. And speaking of volunteering and collaborating, and this is something I want to put a disclaimer on, I'm not advocating like free labor. I'm not saying that you should feel exploited, that you should, spend all this time volunteering and feel burnout. So that's not what I'm advocating at all. I am saying that if you don't have a direct opportunity, sometimes we'll have to do some additional work, and volunteering is one way for us to kind of achieve that goal. So this process will take some time. And there are 2 types of volunteering that I've experienced so far. The first one is having someone take me in, like helping them with their study. So what I did, so around January, I already know I couldn't get in, or I didn't get into any grad programs. So what I ended up doing is looking at people's information, and around this time, I send my full CV and cover letters to different labs, specifically asking if they're hiring, and if they're not, do they have volunteer opportunities? And then I reach out to a few labs, and one of them reached back to me and said, hey, we're happy to have a meeting with you, with the PI and the lab managers. I had a conversation in March 2021. I didn't really start my volunteering journey until May 2021. So it's like a time, there's a timeline there. And then, but what's helpful is it allowed me to sit in meetings and gain connections, because now, given that I'm able to sit in lab meetings, I'm able to be exposed to their work, to understand how like a lab meeting runs, what kind of data, management they're using, what kind of skills, or what kind of softwares they're using. I pick up Inquisitive through this way. And I also have a direct, face-to-face contact with their grad students. So I reach out to grad students asking if we can, have a coffee chat about something, just so I can learn more about their experience. Oftentimes people are really, really welcoming and supportive. And I also just made friends. So like the lab manager in this lab, we became really, really close friends because I did work in UCI. So that's one way to do it. And the second one is proposing a collaboration project. And this relies more on relationship building. So the story is that after I quit my job, I went back to China and I was looking for ways to do research. But at the time, the opportunities are limited. So I did spend some time. I did consider maybe I'll just do research in China, but it was really hard for me to connect to a faculty because I didn't do school in China. So that being said, I found this postdoc on this website as I was like gaining and looking up lab information. I realized that her work is really interesting and fascinating because it was about bias, it was about social cognition. So I reached out in August 2020 because I want to learn more about her work and see ways that I can incorporate that in my proposal. And in this conversation, we kind of really hit it off. And she basically said like, hey, if you are interested, I'm happy to collaborate with you. So I was like, yes. And then we didn't really start data collection until this year, last month, because of how long it took. So I'm saying all this to say that, if you're in a position like I once was, where I was really frustrated, I want to do something, but I just don't know how to start. Here are some ways for you to kind of think about and start. Presentation and publication. So the first thing is, I think we should carve out time to write and apply. So this is very important because if you don't carve out those times, you will never do it. And that's something that I personally experienced. I think this is something we should all do that. I also have internal deadlines, so applications deadlines don't creep on you. For me personally, I've always set up the deadline for something like a week before it's due so that I have time to finish it and asking for feedback. One thing I think is really helpful is collaborating with friends and colleagues. And this is what I mean by giving yourself permission to be a leader. So sometimes, and this is how I felt. Sometimes I feel like I'm not really smart. I don't know a lot of things. Like, what right do I have within myself to propose this idea, to approach this person with this idea, to do something? And then that didn't really change until I was serving on association, because when I was working in an association, one of the tasks I was given is to reach out to faculty and organize workshop. At the time, I was really intimidating. I was like, okay, well, I guess I will do that if this is what is asked of me. But I was still scared. And I reached out, but throughout this whole time, because I had to be the one who's organizing everything, I have to kind of make sure we have a topic, kind of shape the conversation and shape the agenda. I start feeling like I was a leader within this group, and people recognize that as well. So that after our collaboration on the workshop, it made me feel more comfortable reaching out to these faculty, be like, hey, Katie, we had a great topic on mental health for international students. I think we should write a paper about it. What do you think? And she was really happy. She was really excited. And we wrote the paper about mental health experiences of international students during COVID-19. So I say all this to say that if you have an idea, don't be afraid. I'll be the one who reach out to pitch. You might have to do some additional work, like finding out the journal, setting out the timeline, organize the meeting, creating agenda. But that's kind of what first author does as well. So give yourself permission to be a leader. Don't feel impostered. And this, what I mean by benefit a lot for serving and taking the lead in the community, is because of these engagement and involvements, I was able to have that connections, I'm able to kind of have that, transition to publication. Another thing is, sometimes when I talk to students, people have this perception that virtual opportunities are not as valid or not as valuable because you don't get to go somewhere. And I argue that virtual opportunities are actually great because it actually removes a lot of barriers that traditional conference have, because going to a conference is so expensive. There's a flight, there's a hotel, the registration is ridiculous as well. But these virtual sessions and virtual presentations, virtual workshops, virtual conferences allow you to have those exposures, allow you to have those opportunities to put on your CV and resume. It also introduces you to people and program. If it wasn't through Psyching Out, I wouldn't have known Emily or Sharon, all these wonderful people, and Katrina too. And then experiences of submitting things are also valuable, because if you submit a journal, you get to practice on how to write cover letters. You have drafts of those cover letters. It's really frustrating, annoying, but that's a good practice. You can also write the journal and the articles that you've submitted in your CV, because you're waiting for hear back. Sometimes you might see people on their CV, there will be like manuscript in preparations, where they have like submitted, revise and resubmit. These are things that people have submitted that haven't been accepted, but they can still put that on their CV and resume. And in terms of conferences, so oftentimes conference will give you feedback. So say even if you didn't get accepted, you'll get some feedback about ways that you can improve your paper, if it's paper presentation, or your poster, if it's a poster presentation, which can be really valuable as you kind of hone those skills. Also ask your colleagues, co-workers, professors for recommendations on where to submit, because sometimes if they've submitted or went to something before, they can give you some insight about what type of presentations, what kind of theme they're looking for. Also sign up for listserv, but most importantly, take time to process all the incoming notifications. What I mean is this. So I sign up for listserv, and this is my forum tab of my Gmail, because there's so many information. So what I do is I have two emails. I have my personal email where I receive all these listserv, and I have my professional email where I work and do most of my productive, aspect of things. And then what I do is, when I'm going through my email during the day, I will go to my personal email, kind of filter through these, kind of see which one relates, which one's interesting. And then for the ones and the opportunities I see as important and valuable, I will forward that email to my work email as a way to remind myself, like, hey, this is something you can do. The reason why I do this is because for a while, I feel really overwhelmed. When I see I have like 110 emails in my work email, I'm just like, I'm already stressed about work. I don't have time for this. So I keep them separate. That being said, I also realize that if I don't have time, if I don't tell myself, Ariel, you're going to take 10 minutes to go through these emails, I never will. So I do that as a way to kind of filter through these information. We also have our lovely Psyching Out conference sub-channel where people like Ara share all these wonderful information. So this also takes some time for you to filter through, but it is a great place to start. Twitter also offers a lot of these great information. And don't forget about your undergrad work. So if you did a project when you were in undergrad, make a goal to finish a write-up and submit it for presentation and publication. So the publication that I did, that took me like 2 years, was my thesis from my master's work. And it was actually a higher education paper, so I had to do a lot of work to rewrite it into like a more psychology focus, because I ended up publishing in a psychology journal. So that being said, don't just throw away your work, still write it up and submit it for presentation and publications. And then you can consider starting with a student-friendly journal. This is something I learned from the hard way, because I didn't have like the mentorship and guidance that I wish I had. What I end up doing is I just look at like, ooh, you have a high index, you are an influence journal, I want to submit to you. I will submit, get a desk reject, submit, get a desk reject. So I'll start like reevaluating, okay, well, so what are the things I should do to make my submission more successful? A quick segue about publication. So oftentimes, if you submit the journal, they will have like an admin-like position to kind of take a preview of your paper, be like, this paper is good, let me forward to the reviewers to formally review. But sometimes they're like, this paper is bad, not good, and they'll just like reject it. So it got rejected before you even reach the reviewer, so to speak. And that's what happened to me. And then for student-friendly journals, I just look up like psychology student-friendly journals, and the first thing that show up was Psychi, and that's the journal I ended up submitting to. Another thing is you can read the aim and scope of for more information. So what happened is when you go to a journal website, they will have aim and scope, or they'll have something like 4 submissions, and in reading it, they'll kind of tell you the keywords. So if they use a word like cutting edge or like advanced levels, chances are they're not very student friendly, because they're looking for more seasoned professionals publications. But if they say something like, we welcome to new scholars, that means that this journal is more opening and welcoming to student-oriented journals, student-oriented submissions. You can also reach out to your school and department. Sometimes schools have a publication as well. So my master's at NYU, so I know that NYU we have a student, or my department or my school actually have their own student journal as well. Worst come worst, you can always reach out to the editors. You can just be like, hey, here's a situation. I have this paper. I was wondering, is this something appropriate for your journal? And then they'll be like, yeah, sure, send it in. Or they'll be like, we're looking for something else. Continue relationship with your previous lab. I think this is really important too, because sometimes when we graduate, we just feel like, bye, now I'm in my next part of my life. I do think that you should continue those relationships. So if you are doing like data cleaning for a previous project, do finish that and ask and be the leader proposing, hey, can we present this somewhere? Hey, can we publish this somewhere? If your department hosts conferences, ask whether you can still present as an alum, because that's what I did when I just graduated from my undergrad, because those are still opportunities for you to get exposures and get connected. And say if you're someone like, what if I just don't have anything? No worries. What I recommend is propose a study to your PI if you're working in a lab, or propose a study to like a potential collaborator, which is kind of what I did. So what I mean by this is two ways. Number one is a story about how I reached out to a postdoc, and we are doing this project on social cognition right now. The second one is actually my current experience. So I'm interested in something like biculturalism, social cognition, intergroup biases, but my lab is a working memory lab. So my lab does things like working memory, executive functioning, neuroscience. So I don't have a lot of opportunity to be exposed to the work I really like to do. So what I ended up doing is I did my own literature review, and I just told my PI, it's like, hey, Susan, who's super great and super awesome. I love Susan. I was like, hey, Susan, this is something I really want to do. Like, can I do this while I'm in your lab? And she's like, yeah, of course. And she recommended me mentor students who are part of our undergraduate research program. So basically through mentoring students, I'm able to kind of put my research agenda on their work as well, get funding and do research, but also get mentorship experience. So I say to say that if there's no project that interests you, consider proposing a study to your PI. This is also a great exercise, because when you apply for all the fellowship, they will ask you to submit a proposal, and you're killing two birds with one stone. I'm doing literature review is always helpful. Meta-analysis is a skill that you can pick up. So meta-analysis is a systematic way of analyzing published and existing literature, oftentimes look at effect size and to make a conclusion about certain things. And this is something that's definitely doable maybe not on your own, but doable on your side. Also look for proposal poster sessions. I didn't actually know this was a thing until this year in APS, because at APS, which stands for Association of Psychological Sciences, there was a session about poster proposal. And I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And in conversation with the people who attended APS, one of the person mentioned like, yeah, because of COVID, people are realizing that access is a big thing. So they're having more of this. So I know that APS for sure has one, and I would just recommend looking up information like related to the keyword, psychology, proposal poster session, and see what you can find. And then, so if you haven't seen Wreck-It Ralph 2, is pretty cute. And then oftentimes when I find information and have these sessions, I always feel like Wreck-It Ralph when he was introduced to the internet, because there's so many information. So I say all this to say that you might feel overwhelmed as you're looking up this information. That's why, as mentioned earlier, it's helpful to have a board of, advisors. Could be your friends, it could be your PI, it could be your mentors, to help you filter through some of these informations and help to point you in a certain direction. And one of the things I also want to point out is just concept of volunteer, because sometimes we feel like volunteer are opportunities where we have to do long-term and be committed. And this is an example that I kind of want to share. I saw this on the list for Division 45, which is the Division for Culture, Ethnicity, and Racial, and I forgot one more word afterwards. Excuse me, sorry about that. But basically, on the listserv, they were asking volunteers. So they're having a summit. They're looking for workshop hosts. And I was like, oh yeah, sure, just let me volunteer. So I volunteered for this session. Now I can put this information on my CV. But most importantly, because it's a conference that also interests me, I get to go to the conference or summit for in this regards. I get to talk to the speaker and have that like face-to-face and more close-knitted relationship. And I feel comfortable reaching out to them afterwards and asking for additional information. So I say this to say that if you see those like volunteer opportunities, as well as like one time, do consider and do use that as a way to kind of get connected to some folks. Skill development. This is something that I mentioned in another presentation before. I think learning coding and improving data analysis is really helpful. Thanks to things like edx.org, Coursera, Udemy, just like online school in general. A lot of these workshops are much more accessible. So earlier, Mirka asked a question about the R certificate. I got it from the EDX. So you can audit a class for free. And then there's a certificate aspect. But it's really expensive because I have to pay for it. And this is something I always do. I always look for like if they have funding and grant. So I look up edx.org scholarship, and there is a whole section on that. So I explain my situation, I explain my career change, and I'm asking for support, and they gave me like a 90% discount. So I got the certificate for like $30, which is still money, unfortunately, but it's significantly cheaper than what else it would cost me. Coursera also have a lot of classes that you can audit. Udemy also have a lot of classes that you can audit. And this is where you're gonna vary based on who you talk to. So at one point, I was highly recommended by someone. It's like, hey, if you are able to get into data science bootcamp or something like that, do that because it's really helpful, blah, blah, blah. Because the ongoing thread I get about my CV is that I need to, have stronger quantitative skills. So, and then here at my school, we do have like data science bootcamp. So I was like, hey, Susan, what do you think of going? And then Susan's feedback was like, I personally think that you can learn these skills outside of, going to this bootcamp by doing project-based things. And that's the advice I took because she was my advisor or my board of advisors. And that's something I did, which is what I mean by you can do project-based exploratory study. So for example, right now I have this data set. I'm just gonna, throw this at the wall and be like, I want to do a network analysis. I don't really know what that is. I think it'll be helpful because someone told me it could be helpful for my analysis. Don't know what that is. I'm just gonna look it up and just go with it. And another thing just helpful to do is NIH have a good clinical practice training, which is something we also ask our RA to do. But the more people I talk to, the more I realize people are not aware of this training program. It's free. Once you finish, you get the certificate program. And then it's a way to kind of highlight, also refresh your study design skills. Networking. Practice networking. You can start with your friends and colleagues because sometimes people are worried about networking because number one, it feels awkward talking to other people and just talking about yourself. Number two, when you do information interview, it feels awkward because you don't know what to ask. So what I did is I start with my friends and colleagues. And also I reach out to my past professors for insight. So what I mean is during my jobs research, during my career change, this is like what in 2020. And then I end up reaching out to friends classmates that I haven't talked to in a very long time since 2015. So I reached out to them. I was like, hey, Sarah, I just want to ask you about something about psychology because this is what I'm trying to do. And then she got back to me. We had this conversation and it was a good practice for me because number one, I already know Sarah, but it's kind of distant. So I practice talking about asking questions. And number two, for a while, I have this like fear of like, oh, I haven't talked to them in a while. Like maybe they get upset, maybe they forget about me. But they don't. You can always reach out because if they reach out back to you, great. You have another connection. You've gained another friend. If they don't, it's okay because sometimes we grow apart, we forget. And honestly, I haven't reached out to them in a while too, so it's not their fault. So don't be afraid to reach out to your past professors or classmates for insights. And then transferable skills. So this is for those who are not in a research specific positions. So here are the 3 transferable skills I think you can really highlight on your resume and CV as well as just in your work. The first one is data management. So if you oversee any kind of vendor spreadsheet and budget and anything with spreadsheet, that count as data management. I say this to say that during my first gap year, I had this job where I was literally tracking vendor spreadsheets. So I had to see who is our vendor and how many, project assignments they've completed for us. And that, even though it doesn't sound like data management, it is data management, because that's kind of what you're doing with, participant information as well. Report writing analysis is always kind of helpful. So this is what I mean by leading a lot of assessment efforts, because I generally enjoy it. So I end up presenting the annual survey results. Lastly, outreach. So anything that has to do with customer service, getting your information, is considered outreach, because in a lot of lab setting, as well as recruitment, you'll be outreaching to your community. You'll be talking to people, trying to get the recruitment going on. So if you have anything to do with customer service, or just market research, compiling new information, that is outreach. Lastly, I also recommend people to use blogging as a way to start writing. And I say this to say that I blog on my side. I really enjoy writing. Sometimes it's just like streams of consciousness, sometimes more organized thoughts. But if you are like struggling, saying, hey, I really want to write, but I just don't know where to start, and I just don't have the habit of writing, I think blogging is a good way to start. You can also showcase that, your continuous growth. Personal wise, here's the financial thing. So number one, people don't notice this, but most associations travel grants awards are for students or early career professionals who have their PhDs, which means that people like myself, who are lab managers, who are considered academic personnel, do not qualify for these travel grants, which is really, really sad. If you're working at university, reach out to human resources for resources. So that's what I did. So I was like, look, I don't qualify for all these things, but I really need financial support because I cannot afford all these things. What can I do? So I reached out to our department's HR rep, and my HR was like, I'm not 100% sure, but let me forward you to our staff assembly, I think it's like a staff association, I guess, in my university. And that's kind of how I got connected. And I also told this with my PI early on, as well as my past supervisors. It's like, hey, I'm looking for these opportunities, but it's really expensive. So if you see any kind of scholarship opportunity that I qualify, feel free to forward to me. And Susan did. And then having saving plan is kind of helpful and important. And this is just like a life advice, I think, just like having a saving plan for your life, for your professional development. Grant money usually supports presentations, associate studies. So this is if you are in a lab, using myself as an example. I can't go to a conference and asking for our grant money to present something completely unrelated to working memory, right? Because that's not my grant. So what I had to do, and it's also part of my job, is I end up working with a student on creating a posters that's related to one of the experiments I've done previously. Even though this experiment has nothing to do with culture psychology, has nothing to do with social cognition, it was my work, and also it was under a grant. So after we created the posters, and then the money that we had for the grant was able to support me to go to that. So I say this to say that try to get on presentation publication opportunities on studies associated with the grant, because it'd be easier for you to ask for financial support that way. And here's some places to look. So pathwaytoscience.org is this like a nonprofit website where they're collecting information for supporting post-bac opportunities. So sometimes they will have different internships, different scholarships. That's something for us to look into. And I have two different post-bac training program. One is R25, the one is IRTA. Here are the keywords you can just look up. If your school have a McNair Scholar undergraduate research office, reach out to them and ask, hey, here's my situations. I want to do research. What are some opportunities I have? What are some things I can do? Because they will have some local opportunities. For example, so I'm part of the University of California system, and each UC does things a little bit differently. While I was compiling and putting together this presentation, I found that University of California Santa Cruz, which is another campus, they have a full like sections and resources specifically for post-bac researchers, but it's for Santa Cruz students or alum only. So unfortunately, you probably don't apply to all of us who don't go there. But that's what inspired me to say that, hey, if your school has this office, go reach out and see what they have locally. Networking wise, which is like a big thing people always say, right? Is not who you know, is what you know. Wait, it's not what you know, is who you know. So getting involved in organizations helps because they create genuine connection. They allow you to reach out to them more easily. Responding to volunteer opportunities, like I mentioned earlier, Also, your visibility online could also help others to find you more easily. So try to have a ResearchGate, is ResearchGate. There we go. Try to have a ResearchGate account, refresh your LinkedIn a little bit, and have an academic Twitter, which I know is so difficult because I struggle with this too. But having this visibility online could help others to find you. And don't be afraid to reach out to your old friends. It's a Sarah story I shared earlier. And then life, because research and career is only part of our life. Identify your support network early. If it's your mom, if it's your partner, if it's your best friend, if it's your other friend, if it's your colleague, if it's random strangers online, if it's this anonymous Discord group, whatever you have, identify your supportive network, because this is us taking care of our mental health. Which leads to my second part, take care of your mental health. Know that your plans might change and probably will change. Figure out a way to reflect your values outside of your job, and research, I think, is really important. Also, just be your own cheerleader. I say this to say that, as some of you may recognize, I am Asian and I'm Chinese. So a big part of my upbringing is you have to be humble. You can't brag. You can't talk about your achievement. Oh, it's nothing. And for a while, I think it just made me feel small. It made me feel even more imposter than I already am. So I just eventually said, you know what? I'll just be my own cheerleader. I'll brag. I'll be loud. I'll be proud, because it's how I take care of my mental health. Last but not least, I kind of want to circle back to Naruto again. So Naruto is the main character of the series, which is why the series is called Naruto. But his heroic journey and his journey on becoming a shinobi or a ninja is only one. In this picture, what I really want to highlight is everyone behind him is also a ninja. Just because you didn't follow his path doesn't mean that you're not a ninja. I think it's important for us to keep in mind that other people's pathway is not necessarily for us. And then my lovely teammates, feel free to unmute and show up your face so that we can answer questions and have a community moment.